Beloved, sit down for this one. Because what I am about to walk you through is not a rumor, it is not a leak from a stranger on the internet, it is not another recycled headline from a tabloid trying to squeeze one more day out of a story that already broke every heart in America. This is the full, unredacted preliminary hearing transcript from the David Anthony Burke case, the 21-year-old singer the world knows as D4vd, and every single word I am about to read to you came from a Los Angeles County courtroom, under oath, in front of a judge who has now looked at all of it and ruled that yes, this case moves forward to trial. Not a headline. Not a hot take. Not a podcast panel. The actual paperwork. The actual questions. The actual answers. And I need you to understand something before we go any further, because the next hour of your life is about to change the way you think about a name a lot of people used to hum to on their way to school. The transcripts are worse than the reporting. The transcripts are worse than the leaks. The transcripts are worse than every rumor that has floated around the D4vd case since the moment a decomposed body was pulled out of a Tesla Model X in a Hollywood tow yard last September. Because reporting can only take you so far. Reporting shows you the outline. The transcripts show you the body. And in this case, the body is a 14-year-old girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and the story the state of California is now telling about how she got there, and about the 21-year-old man they say put her there, is the coldest, most step-by-step, most methodically documented blueprint of a killing that I have ever put in front of you on this channel. So stay with me. Because by the time we are done, you are going to know exactly what D4vd is accused of doing on the night of April 23, 2025. Exactly what his phone was doing while a child was allegedly bleeding out in his home. Exactly what he purchased under fake names in the weeks before that night. Exactly what his lock screen looked like the moment police finally cracked into his device. Exactly what the DNA said. Exactly what the maggots said. Exactly what the 71 pounds on the medical examiner's scale said. And exactly what the prosecution now believes he thought he was smart enough to hide from every camera, every neighbor, every algorithm, and every investigator in Los Angeles County. And I promise you, David Anthony Burke was not smart enough. Not even close. The last 4 words Celeste Rivas Hernandez ever received on her phone from David Anthony Burke were these. Gate open. Door unlocked. That message was sent at 10:10 p.m. 20 minutes later. That same phone belonging to D4vd sent another one. Uber said you're here, where you at? 2 minutes after that, 1 word. Hello. 3 minutes after that, 1 more word. Celeste. Then at 10:58, bro, blocking me. And then nothing. She never answered. She never would answer again. Because according to the prosecution's own timeline, entered into the record of that Los Angeles County courtroom, by the time D4vd was typing those last panic-looking texts, Celeste Rivas Hernandez was already dead in his house, in his hands, in his plan. And that plan, according to the state, had been sitting on his doorstep in Amazon shipping boxes for weeks. Under names that were not his. Bought with methods designed not to be traced. Shipped to an address that would, in the end, betray every single alias he thought he had hidden behind. Welcome in, everybody. Before we go any further into what these transcripts actually reveal, if you want the receipts and not the recycled sound bites, make sure that subscribe button is lit up, because this channel does not chase noise. This channel follows the paper trail. And on the D4vd case, the paper trail is a horror novel that just keeps getting longer with every new filing that hits the docket. Let me set the scene the way the LAPD criminalist said it in open court, because the visual anchor of this entire case is not the Tesla, it is not the Hollywood Hills house, it is not the courtroom itself. The visual anchor is a blue inflatable pool. The kind of pool you would throw in your backyard on a Saturday afternoon for a summer cookout with the kids. In the government's version of events, that pool was not for a cookout. That pool, prosecutors argued, was a dismemberment station. 2 chainsaws, purchased under the alias Travian Davis. A fireproof mat, ordered separately. A shovel. A burn box, purchased under the alias Victoria Martinez. Every single one of those items, according to the state's evidence, shipped to the same address, a rental home in the Hollywood Hills tied directly to D4vd. And when the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner finally placed what was left of Celeste Rivas Hernandez on the scale, the number that came back was 71 pounds. 71 pounds. That is what remained of a 14-year-old girl after 5 months in the front trunk of a Tesla Model X sitting in the California summer heat. 11 air fresheners. And I need you to understand, that is not a metaphor, that is not an exaggeration for effect, that is not a number I am pulling out of the air to make this sound worse than it already is. That is testimony. That is testimony given under oath by LAPD criminalist Chelsea Mario, who processed the Tesla Model X registered in D4vd's name at the impound lot where the vehicle was towed after workers reported an unbearable smell. Mario testified that when she began processing that vehicle, she recovered at least 11 separate air fresheners scattered throughout the cabin of the Tesla. Most of them clustered around the center console. Some in the rear seats. And some, disturbingly, in the frunk itself, the front trunk of the Tesla, the exact compartment where investigators say the remains of Celeste Rivas Hernandez had been stored for the entire summer. In one photograph shown to the court, an air freshener sits partially buried beneath what the criminalist described, without softening it, as insect activity. Maggots. Dead flies. The prosecutor asked, plainly, what are we looking at in the center of this photograph? The criminalist answered, plainly, another air freshener. It is just difficult to see because it is beneath the maggots. That is the sentence I need you to sit with for a moment. Beneath the maggots. Another air freshener. Because that one sentence, said out loud under oath in a Los Angeles County courtroom, tells you everything you need to know about the mind of the person the state now accuses of driving that Tesla around Los Angeles for months while a 14-year-old child was decomposing inside it. And to give credit where it is due, because credit is due, the reporting on the D4vd case has been strong from the very beginning. Julia Deng of NBC Los Angeles did remarkable work from inside that courtroom, because remember, there were no cameras allowed inside the preliminary hearing. No audio equipment. No recording devices. Just pens, notebooks, and the discipline of reporters who understood exactly how historic this case was going to become. But even the best in-court reporting can only capture so much. The transcripts capture everything. Every hesitation. Every objection. Every long silence. Every damning admission. And we now have those transcripts. Every single page. Every single exhibit reference. Every question and every answer, from both days of the preliminary hearing, in the language they were actually spoken. And what the state of California laid out across those days of testimony is not a case built on vibes. It is not a case built on suspicion. It is not a case built on inference. It is a case built on receipts, on DNA, on Amazon order histories, on cellular pings, on iCloud extractions, and on text messages sent from a 19-year-old rising musician to a 13-year-old middle school girl about a period tracking app. Yes. You heard that correctly. Stay with me, because it gets worse from here. Significantly, unspeakably worse. The prosecution's timeline in the D4vd case does not begin in April of 2025, when Celeste Rivas Hernandez died. It begins in 2022, when investigators say David Anthony Burke first met her online. She was 11 years old. He was 17. That is the age gap the state is asking a jury to hold in mind before anything else. And by the time Celeste turned 13, prosecutors allege, the relationship between D4vd and this middle school girl had already turned sexual. And they have the messages to prove it. Every one of them, extracted from iCloud, entered into evidence, and now sitting on the record for anyone with access to the transcript to read for themselves. In November of 2023, according to testimony from the lead detective on the D4vd case, Celeste Rivas Hernandez texted David Anthony Burke, and I want to be careful with the language here, because I am reading directly from the transcript that was entered into court. She texted him, and I quote, currently manifesting my period because I refuse to have kids. She was 13 years old. She had just turned 13 2 months earlier. His response. Did you miss your date? Then a follow-up from D4vd, use flow. And when the prosecutor asked the detective on the stand what flow was, the detective answered plainly. It is a telephone application for women to track their menstrual cycles. So there it is, on the record of the Los Angeles Superior Court. A 19-year-old man telling a 13-year-old girl to download a menstrual tracking app, because, as D4vd himself put it in that same conversation, it is ovulation week for you, it's important. I just need to make sure you are on top of your cycle. Beloved. That is not a relationship. That is not a romance gone wrong. That is not what the tabloids will sometimes try to package as a love story with a bad ending. That is, according to the prosecution's own words on the record, the grooming of a child by an adult who was already thinking about the biological consequences of what he was doing to her. And no one, has forgotten that Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 13 years old when those texts were sent. 13. In middle school. 2 months past her 13th birthday. That is the age of the child on the receiving end of every one of the messages that prosecutors have now placed before a Los Angeles Superior Court judge. And the messages get worse. Because in January of 2024, prosecutors say the conversation between D4vd and Celeste Rivas Hernandez shifted from tracking a period to terminating a pregnancy. According to the detective's testimony at the preliminary hearing, on January 8 of 2024, D4vd asked Celeste, and I am quoting directly from the transcript, "When you going to get it done?" She answered, 2 days. And then, in a message that has now become the single most quoted line from this entire preliminary hearing, David Anthony Burke sent this. Also, my mother always told me to ask this question if I ever was in this situation. It is not insinuating anything, so don't get offended, please. But it is mine, right? And Celeste's response, the 13-year-old child's response, was this. Of course, it is yours, David. That is the record. That is what the state of California is preparing to place in front of a jury of 12 strangers when this D4vd case finally goes to trial. And there is more. Because later that same day, according to the detective's testimony, David Anthony Burke asked Celeste what she wanted as, and again, I am quoting directly from the transcript, an abortion gift. Her answer, according to the messages, I want the Balenciaga hourglass purse. And that evening, at around 5:17 p.m., in a message that will follow D4vd into every closing argument of this trial, Celeste Rivas Hernandez asked him about a video the two of them had made together. She wrote to him, again, this is a 13-year-old girl typing this, is no leak it, please. Please do not leak it. And D4vd's one-word reply, according to the prosecution's evidence, was a racial slur that appeared in his text messages with the first letter capitalized and the rest in lowercase, the answer being, essentially, that he would never let it get out. I want you to hold that in your head for a second. The abortion gift. The Balenciaga hourglass purse. The sex tape. The 13-year-old middle school girl asking a grown man not to leak the video of her. Because that is the emotional foundation of everything the prosecution is about to build on top of it as this case moves toward trial. The D4vd case is not, in the state's telling, a case about a bad romance that got out of hand. The D4vd case is a case about a grown man who, according to the government, spent almost 2 years building a career, a persona, and a public identity on top of a secret that he knew, and knew for a fact, could destroy everything if the wrong person ever found out. And then, on April 23 of 2025, according to the state, David Anthony Burke decided that secret was worth more than the child who could reveal it. Return fire, please, if you're still with me, hit that like button, because it genuinely tells the algorithm this case deserves to be seen, because before I take you inside the day Celeste Rivas Hernandez actually died, I need to walk you through the money. Because in the D4vd case, the money is the motive. The state has said so out loud, in open court, and they have built the special circumstance allegation on top of it. On day 2 of the preliminary hearing, the prosecution called a senior vice president of finance from Interscope Capital, under the umbrella of Universal Music Group. His name is Louis Pumerware, and if I have mangled his last name, and I am fairly sure I have, I sincerely apologize, names have never been my strongest skill. But the substance of his testimony was surgical. The prosecutor asked, on the record, how much D4vd had earned between 2023 and 2025. His answer, roughly $10 to $11.5 million in gross earnings. $10 to $11.5 million. For a young man barely out of his teens. From 2 albums, an EP, streaming, merchandising, touring, the full commercial ecosystem of a modern breakout artist. And that number, in the D4vd case, is not a curiosity. That number is the pillar the prosecution is building its financial gain special circumstance argument on top of. Under California law, killing to eliminate a threat to your financial future is not just first-degree murder. It is first-degree murder with a special circumstance, the kind of allegation that unlocks the possibility of the death penalty in the state of California. Beloved, the machinery that manufactures stars is on trial here just as much as D4vd himself is. Because Interscope did not just sign a kid with a nice voice and a hit single. They signed a kid whose entire brand, his songs, his image, his aching heartbreak persona, the exact demographic he was singing to on TikTok and Spotify every single day, was pointed at the same age range that he is now accused of secretly abusing behind the scenes. And when Celeste Rivas Hernandez, according to the prosecution, threatened to expose him, that entire $10 million machinery was suddenly balanced on the mouth of a 14-year-old middle school girl. That, prosecutors argue, is the motive. Full stop. Every song, every stream, every sold-out show, every brand deal, every appearance fee, all of it, in the state's telling, was one phone call away from disappearing forever. And the state believes D4vd knew it. Now let me show you what the prosecution says David Anthony Burke actually did on the night Celeste Rivas Hernandez died. April 23, 2025. According to the state's evidence, D4vd texted Celeste earlier in the day and told her to come to the Hollywood Hills home. He called her an Uber. She arrived. And then, at some point in the 90 minutes that followed, according to the prosecution, David Anthony Burke stabbed her twice. Once in the abdomen, a wound that pierced her liver. Once in the left chest. Injuries that, according to the Los Angeles County medical examiner who testified at the preliminary hearing, would have caused her to bleed out within a matter of minutes. There would have been vocalization, the prosecution argued in open court. There would have been sound. There would have been screams. There would have been noise. And in that time, the exact minutes when a 14-year-old girl was bleeding out on his floor, D4vd did not dial 911. He did not call the police. He did not call an ambulance. He did not call a friend. He did not call his manager. He did not, according to the record, call anyone at all. Instead, the state argues, he did something else. He built an alibi. And the text messages tell you exactly how he built it. At 10:10 p.m. on the night of April 23, D4vd's phone sent Celeste the message, "Gate open. Door unlocked." 20 minutes later, at 10:31 and 3 seconds, the same phone asked, "Uber said you're here, where you at?" At 10:33, one word. "Hello." At 10:36, another single word. "Celeste." At 10:58, "Bro, blocking me." And then hello again. And at 11:37, one more bro. And at 11:41, one more message still. The prosecution's argument to the judge at that preliminary hearing was devastating in its simplicity. He was not looking for her. He was creating a paper trail that would make it look like he was looking for her. Because if the phone shows that D4vd is confused about where Celeste is at 11 p.m., then how could he possibly be the same person who killed her at 10? That is the theory. And the state believes a jury of 12 Los Angeles County residents is going to see it exactly the same way when the trial finally begins. But it gets colder. Because prosecutors say that in the days after Celeste Rivas Hernandez's death, D4vd made 3 separate trips to a remote area of Santa Barbara County. And the reason we know about Santa Barbara County is because months later, a highway worker discovered Celeste Rivas Hernandez's identification card in that exact area. Not near her home. Not near her family. Not anywhere she would have had a reason to be. In a stretch of road that D4vd's own cellular data, according to prosecutors, places him at during those specific days. The defense's counter is that there is no direct surveillance footage placing D4vd there. The prosecution's response is that cellular analysis does the work that the cameras could not. His phone pings. His car pings. His movements ping. And the pings tell a story that the defense, at the preliminary hearing at least, had not yet found a way to fully explain away. And now for the piece that broke the internet when it first surfaced, and that the transcript now confirms in language that no one wanted to read. According to the testimony of the lead detective who processed D4vd's phone, David Anthony Burke's iPhone lock screen, the image that appeared every single time he picked up his device, every single time he unlocked it, every single time he opened a text message or answered a call, was a photograph of himself and Celeste Rivas Hernandez in an embrace. Both of them. Both of them shirtless. She was, again, a minor at the time the photograph was taken. That is the image D4vd saw every time he opened his phone. That is the image he was looking at while he was texting a 13-year-old about ovulation. That is the image he was looking at while ordering chainsaws under a fake name. That is the image the police found the moment they finally got that phone into evidence. And as I have said before on this channel, legally, that changes everything. Because it is one thing for a defense attorney to argue in a courtroom that graphic material found on a device did not belong to the defendant, that someone else must have placed it there, that the device was shared. It is another thing entirely when the defendant himself is in the material. That is not a chain of custody problem. That is a photograph. That is a face. That is a body. As if that weren't heavy enough, the DNA evidence in the D4vd case buries whatever little air was left in the room. LAPD criminalist Samantha Tuch testified at the preliminary hearing that blood recovered from a mat in the garage of the Hollywood Hills home, from a rowing machine inside that same home, and from a Tesla charging plug, all of it matched Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And when I say matched, I do not mean casually. I mean the exact statistical language the criminalist used in open court. 1 septillion times more likely to have originated from Celeste Rivas Hernandez than from any other individual on planet Earth. Let me say that number for you one more time, because it is genuinely difficult to conceptualize. 1 septillion. That is a 1 followed by 24 zeros. Even accounting for the severe decomposition of the remains that were recovered from the Tesla Model X, the DNA science is not close. The DNA science is not debatable. The DNA science is Celeste. Full stop. The circumstantial case that the state is building on top of that DNA, the theory that David Anthony Burke used one or both of the chainsaws he purchased under a fake name to dismember Celeste Rivas Hernandez's body, is not something the prosecution needs to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt at the preliminary hearing stage. That fight is coming at trial. But everything around that theory is stacking. The blue inflatable pool. The shovel. The burn box. The fireproof mat. The chainsaws. The frunk. The 11 air fresheners. The maggots. The 71 pounds. Every single item, every single measurement, every single photograph. All of it entered into the record of the Los Angeles Superior Court. All of it now on the docket. All of it waiting for a jury. Now the defense in the D4vd case is not sitting quietly through any of this, and it would be journalistically dishonest of me to pretend otherwise. Defense attorney Marilyn Bedarsky has been sharp, and she has been strategic. Her theory of the case, as far as it emerged at the preliminary hearing, comes down to 3 main pressure points. 1. Chain of custody. If any piece of evidence was mishandled at any point in the investigation, that evidence becomes vulnerable at trial. 2. Cause of death timing. The medical examiner could not pinpoint the exact time that Celeste Rivas Hernandez died. And the defense pressed hard on the possibility that the wounds could have been self-inflicted, that Celeste may have been holding the weapon that caused her injuries. The medical examiner, to his credit, acknowledged that it was theoretically possible. But he also testified that he found no hesitation marks, the kind of shallow, tentative wounds that are typically seen in cases of suicide or self-harm. So the door the defense tried to open, the medical examiner very carefully closed most of the way behind them. And 3. The intent question. The defense argued that the state had not proven malice aforethought sufficient to sustain a first-degree murder charge. They pointed out that Celeste had allegedly threatened only to expose D4vd, not to go to law enforcement. Their argument, in essence, if the threat was just tabloid exposure, and if David Anthony Burke was not the kind of man who paid close attention to his own finances despite earning between $10 and $11.5 million, then how could the state seriously argue that he killed her for financial gain? The prosecution's rebuttal was, and I am using this word deliberately, surgical. So we are talking about a victim who has been stabbed twice, said the prosecutor. I cannot understand how anybody would believe that you would not notice that. I assume there would have been some vocalization. And during that time, the defendant does not call 911. He does not call law enforcement. He apparently does not call any friends. Maybe he calls his family, but he does nothing to try to save her life. So there is nothing about this case that sounds like an accident. There is, in fact, everything about this case that sounds like a plan. And they pointed to a previous plan, a plan that D4vd and Celeste Rivas Hernandez had allegedly discussed months earlier, a plan that they had explicitly named Operation Awesome. Operation Awesome, the prosecution argued, was the plan D4vd and Celeste had put together to help Celeste run away from her family and move in with him when she was 13 years old. In the messages entered into evidence at the preliminary hearing, David Anthony Burke coaches her step by step: tell the driver to stop at a stop sign, make multiple trips to the car, how are you going to carry a heavy bag by yourself? This, prosecutors argued, is a man who plans. This is a man who plans quietly, methodically, and in writing. And the plan that D4vd executed on April 23 of 2025, they argued, was simply the newest version of a mind that had been drafting these plans for a very long time. The plan changed. The planner did not. Now, listen closely. Because there is a moment in the transcript, based on the reporting from inside the courtroom, where the temperature of the room dropped in a way that even the defense could not warm back up. It is the moment the prosecution began walking through the searches and the purchases. Under the alias Travian Davis, prosecutors say, D4vd ordered the 2 chainsaws. Under the alias Victoria Martinez, D4vd ordered the burn box. Under his own name, other items, but the sensitive ones, the ones that pointed most directly at a dismemberment plan, were routed through fake identities. The defense's counter was that the state has not yet conclusively proven who physically placed those orders, and whether any of it might have been done by someone acting on the defendant's behalf. But that is exactly the question the jury will decide. What the preliminary hearing established, without any ambiguity at all, is that the state has enough to move forward, and the judge agreed. A Los Angeles Superior Court judge has now formally ruled that there is sufficient evidence for David Anthony Burke to stand trial on 3 sets of charges. First-degree murder with special circumstances. Continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14 years old. And unlawful mutilation of human remains. D4vd has pleaded not guilty to every single one of those charges. Let me pause on that phrase for you for a second. Special circumstances. In the state of California, that is not a phrase that prosecutors reach for casually. That is the specific legal language that, if proven at trial, unlocks the possibility of the death penalty as a sentencing outcome. The current elected district attorney for Los Angeles County, Nathan Hochman, has not yet announced whether the state will formally seek the death penalty against David Anthony Burke. But everything about the way this case has been publicly constructed, the special circumstance allegation for financial gain, the continuous sexual abuse charge for a child under 14, the additional charge for mutilation of human remains, every single one of those choices was made by prosecutors who understand exactly how heavy the eventual sentencing landscape can become. This is not a case being tried lightly. This is a case being tried with the full weight of the state of California behind it. Arraignment on the formal charges is currently scheduled for August 31st, when the formal reading of the charges will happen in open court, and when we will get our first real signal as to whether the death penalty will be formally on the table. And as we look toward that arraignment, I want to be very careful about something, because I think you deserve honesty about it. There are gaps in the D4vd case. Any responsible coverage of this story has to acknowledge them. There is no direct surveillance footage confirming the trips to Santa Barbara County. There is no eyewitness to the killing itself. The medical examiner could not lock in an exact time of death. The chain of custody battles the defense is going to fight at trial are going to be aggressive, technical, and prolonged. And any one of those gaps, in the hands of a determined and well-funded defense attorney, is a gap the state of California will have to fill with the strongest circumstantial evidence a Los Angeles County jury has been asked to consider in years. That is not a small challenge. It is a real one. And it deserves to be named out loud rather than skipped over. But, and I say this carefully, because the language matters, the transcripts in the D4vd case also show something else. They show a young man whose text messages to a 13-year-old middle school girl are so explicit that reading them aloud in court reportedly caused family members sitting in the gallery to break down. They show a phone with a lock screen that depicts a grown man and a minor, both partially nude, on the exact device that was used to send those messages. They show between $10 and $11.5 million in gross earnings sitting on top of an alleged sexual relationship with a child. They show 2 chainsaws bought under a fake name. They show 11 air fresheners scattered through a Tesla Model X. They show 1 septillion times more likely to be Celeste Rivas Hernandez's DNA on that mat in that garage. They show 71 pounds on a medical examiner's scale. And they show a series of text messages sent on the night of April 23 that read, according to the prosecution, less like the messages of a worried boyfriend and more like the messages of a man who was already building the receipt he thought he would need in court one day. What D4vd did not seem to understand, what almost no one in his position ever seems to understand, is that the receipts he was building were the exact same receipts that would eventually be entered into evidence against him. So let me leave you with the question that everybody watching the D4vd case is now wrestling with in one form or another. What do you actually think was going through the mind of David Anthony Burke on the night of April 23, 2025? Was D4vd thinking at all? Was there a moment, one single moment, in the 90 minutes between the message that said gate open, door unlocked and the message that said bro, blocking me, where he could have picked up the phone and called for help, and instead chose the burn box and the chainsaws and the 11 air fresheners? Was the panic on his phone real, or was the plan already sitting in the drawer? The prosecution says the plan was in the drawer for months. Operation Awesome was the first draft. What happened on April 23, they argue, was the second. And here is the meta question that no courtroom in Los Angeles County is going to fully answer, because it is not the kind of question a jury is impaneled to consider. What does the machinery around D4vd owe Celeste Rivas Hernandez now? The label that paid him. The platforms that hosted him. The streaming services that pushed his songs into the ears of millions of teenage girls. The fans that streamed him. The industry that never asked hard questions about the age of the demographic his music was aimed at. What does that ecosystem owe the family of a 14-year-old girl whose body was pulled out of a Tesla Model X in a Hollywood tow yard under maggots and 11 air fresheners? Because the only person who can, at this point, be held legally accountable for what happened to Celeste Rivas Hernandez is D4vd. But the ecosystem that built him is standing right behind him, quietly, without comment, in some cases still collecting royalties, and no one has yet asked that ecosystem to answer for anything at all. So tell me, where do you land on the D4vd case? Do you believe the state of California has already built a case so airtight that no reasonable jury could acquit David Anthony Burke of first-degree murder? Do you believe the defense has one honest opening in this record, and if so, where do you think it is? Or do you believe the truth is somewhere in the middle, that D4vd is almost certainly guilty of something, but that the exact charge, the exact sentence, and the exact accountability still hang on a jury of 12 strangers that has not yet been impaneled? Say it in the comments. Say it plainly. This channel reads every single one. And what you say in those comments genuinely does shape how we cover the arraignment on August 31st and every step after that. Because we are not done with the D4vd case. Not by a long shot. The arraignment is coming. The formal reading of the charges is coming. The trial calendar is coming. The defense's witness list is coming. The prosecution's exhibit list is coming. The medical examiner's full report is coming. The digital forensic reports on that iPhone are coming. And the day we hear a jury of 12 Los Angeles County residents walk back into that courtroom and say a single word, guilty, or not guilty, is the day this story finally, mercifully, moves from the transcripts into the record books. Until then, we watch. Until then, we read. Until then, we do not let go. And there is one more piece of this I have to name before we close, because it matters. The name at the center of this entire case does not belong to David Anthony Burke. The name at the center of this case belongs to Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She was 14 when her body was pulled out of that Tesla. She had just started to become the person she was going to be. She should have had a first day of high school. She should have had a driver's license. She should have had a graduation and a first job and every ordinary boring beautiful day of a life that D4vd, according to the state of California, took from her. Every time you see the D4vd case trend on your timeline, I want you to say her name out loud. Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Because it is far too easy, in a media environment that is built around famous defendants, to forget that the reason we are all here is a middle school girl who deserved every single one of the years that she is never going to get. Until then, keep the paper trail close. Because gate open, door unlocked was not the beginning of a love story. It was not the beginning of a romance. It was not the beginning of anything except the last 90 minutes of a 14-year-old girl's life. It was the last thing Celeste Rivas Hernandez ever read on that phone. And the state of California now believes it knows exactly who typed it, exactly why he typed it, and exactly what he did in the 90 minutes that followed. And when this trial begins in a Los Angeles County courtroom, we are going to be here, page by page, exhibit by exhibit, transcript by transcript, filing by filing, until every last question in the D4vd case finally has an answer. Subscribe. Turn the notifications on. Stay close to this channel. Because in the D4vd case, the next document drop is never far away, and neither, I promise you, are we.